Hey there, G3 here, and let's start with our first episode of Dungeon Workshop. When you're talking about RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, the concept of campaigns is frequently brought up. I can say from experience that this is a vague concept for most new DMs. What do you mean campaigns? Like, should I be crafting a huge Lord of the Rings style saga? Are there going to be gigantic battles and Game of Thrones style political intrigue? The task of creating and running a campaign can be vague, daunting, especially when you're trying to introduce your friends to D&D and you want them to have a good time, make sure they're enjoying themselves. I would say that a campaign, in RPG terms, is a loose collection of gaming sessions in which the players complete a number of adventures that are all somewhat connected narratively. This is purposefully broad definition, as there are no real hard and fast rules when these kinds of things come up, and anyone who tells you there are is probably not that fun to play with in the first place. So my point is, as long as everyone's enjoying themselves, your campaign could be anything you and your players imagine. For instance, you could have a campaign where the only link between adventures is that they involve the same characters, and thus it tells the legends of the great Helga the Puncher and Roran the Ladies' Man, or whoever. However, this still leaves the daunting task of actually creating the campaign, and especially if you're trying this for your first attempt, it may be difficult to know how to start. So I'd like to talk about a few concepts and ideas to keep in mind. Hopefully you might find them useful. So one of the things every campaign needs is a world to exist in. Writing down details about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of this world is called world building. For playing with an array of other DMs, from playing with them, and building worlds myself, of course, I've noticed two different approaches mainly to this process. I don't know if there are better terms for the styles of world building I want to discuss, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to call them simulationist and narrativist. A dungeon master with a more simulationist tendencies is more inclined to setting up the laws of the world than the plots that may occur in-game. They often employ like random tables, details about commerce, travel, and they place great importance on the statistics behind the game. Taken to its extreme, this style of running the game is what many refer to as a sandbox. Just like a lot of space but not much inside it, especially not much of like narrative value. On the other side of the spectrum, a more narrativist DM enjoys writing the stories, characters, and settings of the world, sacrificing what might make more sense for like a higher coolness factor. If a player gets drunk in a tavern and winds up wanting to arm wrestle a dwarf, a narrativist DM will focus more on the story and the roleplay elements than the physical die mechanics of who wins the arm wrestle. In fact, a campaign run this way will just have fewer opportunities to roll dice in general. Taken to its extreme, though, the narrativist style of DMing might become what many call a railroad, or a game in which the player's choice doesn't matter, and you want to avoid that at all costs, because that it then becomes not fun for the players, which is how a DM should rank themselves. There's no quote-unquote correct way of running an RPG, and it's not about like one style is good, the other's bad. In fact, I think that like games of D&D and the like, they only function when they have both simulationist and narrativist elements. The mark of a talented DM, I think, is the ability to know how to blend these two seamlessly without the players ever knowing that like X encounter was random, but Y encounter was planned ahead of time. There needs to be enough simulation for players to affect the world and change it, but enough narrative hooks that they feel like they're almost watching a movie. It's so intense, right? Like any other creative pursuit, this is really something you have to feel out and experience, and I'm still in the process of doing so. There's no magic recipe to an awesome game session, because there's just thousands and thousands of just little nuances that goes into a really fun game session. Although right after you have one, you know it. You just feel it. You're like, oh, that was good. So, however, I have just a few things that I've found to be helpful trying to blend narrativist and simulationist elements. One, keep your area of play small but finely detailed. So instead of starting and making a whole vast, country, region, continent, world, just start with a small area of play, so like a town and the surrounding forest or something, but detail it like crazy. Traveling long distances in D&D is only fun when there are like adventures to be had around every corner. And I don't mean, oh, you went another 50 miles and so you roll a dice and then, oh, you were surprised by D6 bandits. That's not fun. There needs to be story behind the things. Think of like Frodo and the rest of the Fellowship in Lord of the Rings. They don't just follow a linear path. They were stymied and followed, and then they had to seek out alternative routes, escapes, traps. They were hunted down. There should be adventures at every corner, or at least adventure hooks. And that way, like, even something as simple as going through the forest might take them in all sorts of crazy directions. Number 2, why is it there? Have an answer to this question for everything you put in your world. Why are these kobolds in this cave? What do they eat? Where do they sleep? What's their daily routine? And you tie all these things in narratively. So instead of a random room with like D6 kobolds and a stone rune in a chest that they have to grab, perhaps like the kobolds are ordered to guard the rune, but they've it's been a really long time and they've gotten really bored, and so they're flinging the stone rune back and forth like a frisbee just for like entertainment, and so the players enter as that's going on, or like they see it or hear it as they sneak up. Little stories like that, just reasons for things to be there, ties everything in, and it will really have a big effect on letting your players change the world around them. Because suddenly when monsters and NPCs have like actual motivations and things that they're doing, then suddenly the actions that players do will very much change, those NPCs' ability to get those things done. Or help it, that could help it or hurt it. Number 3, limit the number of NPCs and monsters you introduce. So players can easily get overwhelmed. Don't sacrifice their independence to railroad them into the character you want, though. That's like really important. What I would recommend is have a few detailed NPCs laid out all around, like, for example, the town. So like one in the inn, one's in the church, one's in the tavern, etc. When the players take interest in one of the specific characters, use it and go with it, but don't keep flinging new characters at them after they've chosen. So then once they're like, oh, they spot the dude in the tavern and they really like him, and they're laughing because there's some funny quirk about him, like maybe he has a giant mustache, or talks with he's with crazy made-up words or something. So let's say they pick that NPC, we'll then use that, and anytime they have that's their liaison to that town, and let's say 2 adventures from now they hear word that that town was attacked by goblins, that is who they're going to think of. They can't keep in their head like 7 different people that they've met. They need 1 or at most 2 people in towns that are their contact points, and the monsters are characters in and of themselves, but keep the number of monster species also low. So if you have kobolds, you might have kobolds being led by half-dragons and then 1 big dragon that lives up in the mountains or whatever that they worship. You don't have to have every page in the monster manual tabbed of like, okay, and there are zombies in here and blah blah in here, because everything needs a reason. So, and then have some good guy monsters as well, but at most I would say 5. You can't have more than 5, and especially in one adventure. Campaign, maybe you get away with it, but keep those, just like the geography, keep it small but detailed. Because in the end of the day, D&D takes a while just to do simple things, because players have fun and it's a game, and the role-playing, when you really get into the role-playing, it doesn't matter if, all you've done this session is walked through town and gotten an adventure hook. They'll remember all the fun they had if you have all these details prepared for them. So thanks for watching. Please continue the discussion in the comments. Which style of DMing do you lean towards? Did I miss a style of DMing? Let me know, and I'll post a new Dungeon Workshop next Monday. Thanks.